This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try to explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
Hello, good evening and welcome to another edition of Planet X Live, or perhaps it's good morning or good afternoon, depending where you're listening to us. On tonight's show, we've got Stretchy, the guy that makes it all happen. Hi, Stretchy.
Hi, AMs. We've
got Ben Emlyn-Jones. Hiya, Ben.
Hi, AM. How's it going?
Brilliant. And also we've got Anthony Beckett, producer of Exopolitics GB. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Cheers.
Terrific. We've got coming up later on the competition winners, which are 2 tickets to attend the Exopolitics on the 29th of September, as well as a selection of DVDs of your choice of former Exopolitics conferences which have taken place. And then later on the show, we're going to be going over live to Rochester, New York, to speak to author and speaker and researcher Richard Dolan. What a show we've got lined up for you. You're listening to Planet X Live.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups, this is Planet X. Planet X. What's weird on the web this week?
Before we head over to Rochester, New York and speak with our guest this evening, Richard Dolan, it's that time where we're going to speak to our Planet expert, Ben Emlyn-Jones, and find out what's been getting Ben's attention this week in the news. Hi, Ben. What's got your goat this week, mate?
Oh, hi. There's quite a lot, actually. I mean, of course, the situation in Syria is catching everyone's attention at the moment, and I could talk a lot about that, but it's a big subject, and we haven't got all the details yet. But there's several other subjects I want to bring up, actually, this week, and one of those is to do with Barack Obama, the US president, and it's actually something I've noticed before, and it does bother me considerably, and that is Barack Obama is the first black president of the United States, and all through his administration and during his election campaign, he has tried to associate his own identity with that of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, of course, was an activist in the 1960s for black people who were being treated very, very badly in many parts of the United States in those days, and he was a very decent man. He believed in non-violent non-cooperation with the system. He was inspired very much by Mahatma Gandhi. He was very much a spiritual man as well as a politician, and was one of the most respected people in history. Now, Barack Obama is the same colour as King, but apart from that, I can see absolutely nothing remotely similar about them. Martin Luther King was a man of peace. Barack Obama flies drones into Pakistan to blow people up, innocent bystanders. But Martin Luther King, of course, fought racism. He fought against racism against black people. Barack Obama is bedfellows with people who want to basically genetically modify all natural human races and reduce us to less than 500 million. And this is what I think is happening here, because we had a situation where the other day, it was the 50th anniversary of a famous speech that Martin Luther King gave in Washington, D.C., and to mark the occasion, Barack Obama gave a speech from the very, very same location that King had done 50 years to the day. Now, I think this is a very, very nasty trick, a psychological trick that's being played on the American people and people around the world, as well as an insult, actually, to the memory of Martin Luther King. This is not the first time that Obama has tried to leech off the legacy of Martin Luther King. He was actually inaugurated on Martin Luther King's birthday deliberately. We've got to get our heads around the fact that he may be America's first black president, but we must realise that this impression that because of that he's an anti-establishment figure is completely deluded. it's all empires and oppressive regimes have done this, okay, over the centuries, over the millennia. They have fooled their conquered subjects by withdrawing overt power and replacing it by a man of the people, a member of the conquered people who appears to be on their side, but it's completely and utterly the puppet of the empire. Now, the Roman Empire did this, the Spanish did this, the British Empire did this. It's the oldest trick in the book. I mean, Alex Jones made a film called The Obama Deception, which goes into this in more detail. But really, I really hope that Americans don't fall for this again. Mm-hmm. We don't fall for it again, because really, we shouldn't. So that's something that definitely got my goat this week.
Good. And there was something else you were going to tell us about that you mentioned earlier. I'm fascinated about this.
Yeah, this is kind of more a prediction than something I've sort of got my attention. It's something that's crept up on me kind of over the last few weeks, and that is there's a man I think everyone needs to keep an eye on, because I think he's going to play a very, very important role in the agenda to suppress information about paranormal, spiritual matters, UFOs, etc. His name is Professor Brian Cox, and I'm sure most listeners will have heard of him, because over the last few years he has gone from being a scientist working at the particle accelerator at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. He was featured on a couple of TV programs a few years ago, but since then he's been taken by the BBC and by other media organisations, and he's been basically groomed to become a major media star. Which he has indeed. I mean, he's presenting all kinds of programs now about science. Even thing is, he's presenting wildlife programs like David Attenborough used to do. David Attenborough's now retired. When thing is, Cox is a physicist, not a biologist, but yet he's still put in that position. And he presents several TV shows, several radio shows, and he's actually quite a hardline skeptic. I think he always has been. But he's becoming more so because I think he's been groomed for the role of Mr. TV Skeptic, the kind of job that's done by people like Professor Chris French and Susan Blackmore in the past. He's one of these people, I think, who's quite easy to sort of like subvert, because he obviously enjoys the fame and fortune. He seems to be quite a conceited, egotistical kind of character. And he's very, very aggressive. I'll give you an example of a tweet that Brian Cox put out on Thursday the 29th. Right. A note to nutters. If you want a we value your opinion response, please don't use my personal email. I don't value your opinion, and I will call you names. Now, by nutters, Cox actually is referring to people like us, people who believe in the supernatural, paranormal, conspiracy theories, whether these are derogatory terms or not, and things like that, UFOs. He is a complete skeptic. And when I say call your names, he is a very, very hardline man. He uses the word knobber. He says, "You're a bunch of knobbers and twats," he says. He uses other words that I wouldn't repeat on the air.
You've got the best impersonation of him I've heard so far, Ben.
Professor Brian Cox. You see, he's incredibly photogenic. Like, he's this handsome, sort of like well-dressed man, quite boyish, good looks. I've got a friend actually.
He's a bit like me then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, don't. I tell you what. Don't ever betray us like he has, sir. But no, he's a really quite unpleasant individual. But I mean, he, like I said, he calls us all kinds of names. Some of them are not broadcastable, and he doesn't care. He's quite open about it, and he's allowed to get away with it because he's so famous and so wonderful. And of course, people with ego problems are very, very easy to turn into controlled opposition, or even, I don't think I don't think he's actually hiding any secrets. I don't think he's actually, no one's gone up to him and said, Brian, come here, sit down, have a cigar. Listen, there are such things as UFOs and ghosts, all right, but you're going to tell people that they aren't, okay, and we'll give you £50,000 a week. No, I don't think that's happened. I think, a person like that is a very, very, there are individuals in the field of science and media who I think are keeping secrets deliberately, knowingly. But I think they're in a minority, because people like that are a bit of a liability, because they can easily swap benches and develop a conscience. And so, just briefing everyone in and telling them to be quiet is a very top-heavy conspiracy. I suspect that Cox is much more of what you might call a useful idiot. And he actually believes what he says. I mean, he can spout complete nonsense and be 100% sincere. And people like that are far more useful. And all you have to do is feed his ego, and he'll do whatever you tell him to. He'll be a complete and utter glove puppet for whoever is really trying to keep it secret. So please, listeners, be on your alert for that man, because we're going to see a lot more of him over the years to come.
Give us Rupert Sheldrake any day.
Oh,
that's what I say, Ben.
I won't. Yeah, exactly. Good old Rupert Sheldrake, the man who's. I mean, I won't tell you what Cox said about him.
What did he say about him?
It's not broadcastable.
All right.
He basically he's rude to everyone.
Oh.
He quite openly posts tweets saying how horrible people are who believe in UFOs and the moon landings were faked, or ghosts, and he calls people knobbers. This is a word, I don't know if it's a slang from Manchester or wherever he comes from, or whether it's a word he made up, but I mean, I actually had a campaign called Knobs for Cox. It's a bit like the Cookies for Kelly campaign that the Exopolitics movement actually did. I think, I said to everyone, send him a doorknob. Just not having any. Make sure it's just a nice doorknob. Just shouldn't have any sharp edges or anything that might hurt him. Just send him a doorknob and say, Ryan, you think we're all knobbers, do you? Well, here's your. Do you remember the Cookies for Kelly campaign? Because there was a journalist in America, I think it was the New York Times, who said that people who believed in UFOs were cookies. In other words, nutcases. And so basically his office was inundated with cookies, real cookies, which you can eat. And he had thousands of them. I'm sure he was very popular with his colleagues for a while.
So you remember, everybody, you heard it here first on Planet X Live.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email, find us on Facebook. Planet X.
Richard Dolan is among the world's leading researchers and historians on the subject of UFOs. He's the author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State volumes, both 1 and 2, as well as an analysis of the future entitled AD, After Disclosure, when the government finally reveals the truth about alien contact. He's a regular guest on radio, and he's appeared on many televisions throughout the world, including the History Channel, Sci-Fi and the BBC. Since 2012, Richard has hosted his own The Richard Dolan Show, which airs on KGRA radio every Saturday evening from 8 till 11 Eastern Standard Time. In his books, articles and many interviews, Richard has analysed the destruction of our political liberties as a result of the UFO cover-up, the possible nature of the non-humans themselves, what their presence means for our civilization, why he believes the cover-up will end within our lifetime, and what is likely to happen after that. Richard is near completion of another groundbreaking work entitled UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, which is due out this year. It offers a fresh analysis of this phenomenon for a world in the midst of social and technological transformation, and may well redefine ufology in many important ways. Richard Dolan, welcome to Planet X Live. How are you, Richard? Quite an introduction.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure.
Terrific.
Thank you.
You are going to be coming over and speaking at the upcoming 5th annual Exopolitics event, which is going to be on the 29th of September at Huddersfield University. We're going to talk to you about that
Absolutely.
Later
I'm very
on.
much looking forward to it.
Well, you'd be surprised the amount of people who I've spoken to that have actually made a specific point of saying, I'm going because I want to hear Richard Dolan speak again, and that's genuine. You've been very well received in the past, which is terrific.
So glad to hear that.
I know, and it's all down to Ants. We've got Ants on the line with us, as well as Ben. So it's going to be a good show. We're going to ask you lots of questions, and I'm really pleased that you're happy to go anywhere with this, and it makes a nice change that somebody's very, very open about their work, Richard. But before we start, not many people know a great deal about your work before you came to this field. Now, I know you live in Rochester in New York at the moment with your family, but before all of this happened, Richard, how did you get here? What brought you to these subjects? Tell us a bit about your background to begin with.
Yeah, well, it's a long journey. It's been about a 20-year ride, and I just want to mention, like, as far as answering questions, my attitude is if I've written about it, if I've talked about it, then I will never, ever back away from it. So you can always ask me anything. I mean, truly anything about my research you ever want to ask. I've been doing this now. I've been interested in UFOs. Obsessed really is the right word, not interested, for about 2 decades. I think obsession's really the only word that captures it. But I didn't grow up with an obsession. I grew up as probably an intellectually obsessed kid. I guess I'll say that much. I've always been someone who digs deep, or at least I kind of a bulldog or pit bull. I just go after things, and I want answers. I've always been this way. When I was 10 years old, I was this way, according to my mother, who looked at me one time exasperated and said, "Richard, you have always been like this." And I think there was a little bit of admiration, but there was a bit of exasperation in her voice as well. But yes, I've just been a very motivated learner my whole life. Growing up, my interests have always been basically science and history and philosophy and literature and things like that. When I was a young guy, I went to college, university at a place called Alfred University, which is in western New York State. I grew up in the New York City area. But Alfred was a bit out there, and I just fell in love with history, fell in love with literature, philosophy. And in fact, it was while I was there that I won a scholarship to study at Oxford University. Yeah. I studied political theory, or political ideologies, actually is a technical phrase we had there, at Exeter College at Oxford University. It was back in 1983. I was 21 years old. Yeah. And it wasn't a formal degree program. I got a certificate out of it, which was great. I studied under a South African exile. Remember, this is during the era of apartheid. There's a white South African exile named Gavin Williams. Yeah. And I loved Gavin. We had a great... He was just a really great role model for me. He really was. He was a cool guy, real political, intellectual type of person, and just opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities in the academic world. In fact... I will never forget this. He actually was looking at me as alone, talking with him in his office, and he said, "Richard, I believe you should apply for the Rhodes." Oh, because he was a scholar. That was exactly how he said it. Thank you. And he was a Rhodes scholar. Yeah, and I thought, really? So I went back after that program was done, I had a wonderful experience at Oxford. It was just fabulous. I went back and applied for the Rhodes Scholarship, and I made the final cut. I didn't get it. I really sabotaged my interview, I think, in all kinds of ways. So you really could say I dodged a couple of bullets because, I mean, Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard, or Yale. I mean, these are the schools of the Illuminati, the elite. Yeah. And, back then, I was 21 when I was there. I wanted to get a Rhodes Scholarship. Who doesn't when you're at that age? I thought this would be an awesome thing. It's a career ticket, right? But here's the thing. I'll just tell you. This is actually it's an interesting story. When I was applying for the Rhodes, I made all the preliminary cuts, and then I go down to New York City in Manhattan to do this interview with a bunch of other students, all of whom were like Harvard and Columbia and Princeton and Yale, like the best schools. And my school was a good one, but it was a tiny little school. No one from Alfred University had ever been a Rhodes candidate ever. And so here I was, and I got really turned off by the whole experience. I just have to tell you. And by the committee turned me off even more. The lady who ran the committee turned out to be a really good friend of Henry Kissinger. I had just turned 22 years old, but I can tell you I hated Henry Kissinger as much then as I today. Didn't know all of the reasons why, except I knew I freaking hate Henry Kissinger. And I was so turned off. So then I'm in the interview, and I was the first for the formal interview. And they only give you 15 minutes. It's like a short boom, they give you no time. Yeah. And I just gave him a really crappy interview, I have to say, and I really look back on it, and I feel that I probably somehow sabotaged my candidacy at a certain level. I've often felt that way. I think if I had really been truly motivated and really gung-ho and all that, I probably could have done a better job. As it was, I didn't get the Rhodes. I ended up going to the University of Rochester for graduate school to study history. They gave me a very nice fellowship. And it was in Rochester. I'd stayed here. I've been here ever since. Much longer than my original tenure was supposed to be. It's been about 30 years now. But it's here that I kind of became interested in the UFO phenomenon. And I actually left my PhD studies at the U of R, the University of Rochester, to pursue this life. And I've been pursuing it ever since. So it's been very interesting. It's been an interesting ride.
That's a terrific academic background. Was there any one specific incident that really kind of lit your fire about UFOs? Did you have an experience before you really got into them? Did you see anything yourself, Richard? I think that's something most people always ask researchers.
I didn't have any sightings that triggered my research, although once I began my research, I actually did have 2 sightings. I'd be happy to talk about them. They're not anything that's more dramatic than what most people have had. But what got me engaged, I think, were a combination of a couple of key things. One was my growing frustration with the academic world and mindset. I just have to put it right there on the table. I was always of the idea that I would finish the PhD and teach at a university. Teaching really has always been something that just has come naturally to me. I am a natural communicator. I love being out, like in a classroom and describing all kinds of interesting things. That's an easy thing for me to do. Always was. Even when I was like 25 years old, it was easy. Good. But what happened was that, my initial idealization of the academic world sort of wore off. And what I saw, and this is not to knock academicians. I love many of them. They're good friends of mine. But it's a restricted world, a little more restricted than I had understood when I got into it. You get into the academic world and you have to specialize in a particular, usually arcane field. Yeah. And kind of writing for an academic community is just rather dry, and I used to make fun of it all the time back then. And I was becoming a little bit frustrated with it. At the same time, this is now by the early 90s, and I stumbled into the UFO field. It was 2 things that really triggered me. One was a classic book by a great, brilliant UK author on UFOs, and that's Timothy Good. Mm-hmm. Probably the best all-time UK author on UFOs, in my opinion. And, of course, his classic work, Above Top Secret. And it was the subtitle of that book that caught my attention. It was on a display case in a bookstore. Yeah. The subtitle is The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I looked at the book, I picked it up, and I leafed through it. The thing that got my attention were, well, A, the thickness of the book. It's a big, fat book. But the fact that I recognized many of the names he was referencing from my own research into U.S. national security strategy. At that time, I was really focused on the Truman administration in 1950 and dealing with the Soviets and all of that. So a lot of the names that he had when you're dealing with the early cover-up were the same names and departments that I had been studying quite actively. Yeah. In this moment of what I now call cultural schizophrenia entered my mind, which is, there's official truth over here, and then way over there is this other reality, which looks like it's actually true. So you have official truth and actual truth, and what's the deal? Where, one thing has to be true. Either the UFO topic is total nonsense and BS, or there's something genuine. And if there's something genuine, why has it been out of the academic literature all this time? That was my simple question. Mm-hmm. I wasn't even at the point where I was asking, were UFOs real? I had a simpler, much more conservative question to ask, which is very much just, was the UFO phenomenon a matter of concern to United States, because that's really where my head was at, U.S. national security policymakers back then? And if it was, why have I never read about it in an academic book? And if it was, did they ever stop being interested? Simple question. Simple question. And I blocked him. And then just that really got me started. I mean, one question led to another, which led,
I think it's a very healthy, what you're describing, a very healthy, natural process that led you, but it's that inquiring mind. And you seem to be somebody that, would you say you're quite intuitive, even though you've got a very academic background? There was something you described about Kissinger there, even though you didn't know why, but you felt perhaps you may have just unconsciously sabotaged that interview, for example. Do you find that your intuition ever led you to some of your research?
I'm very much an instinctive kind of person. That's absolutely the truth. I have very, I like to think, well thought out, rational ideas for what I believe. But I go by my gut. It's absolutely true. And I believe, by the way, that we all do have a profound intuition, which we should learn to cultivate and trust. I'm totally into that. But yeah, I feel like there was always something through my 20s when I was still thinking I wanted to be in that world in my early 30s. But there was always something that was nagging at me, and that's absolutely the case. And in fact, I had colleagues then and professors and mentors who've later said to me, Richard, you were always striving for something more than what that world offered you, than what the academic world offered you. And that was a professor of mine who really knew me well, and just made that observation, and I think that's exactly right.
That's terrific. And you came across this book, you had a look at Timothy's book. By this point, you hadn't seen anything yourself in terms of UFOs, or had you? I don't know. No. Okay.
I hadn't seen anything, and I didn't really know anything. I didn't know anything of worth knowing, not more than any typical person. I read his book. I sort of poured through it very carefully. And then at that time, I was also lurking about on what was then the Internet. There was no websites to speak of. This is like 1993, 94, 95. So at that time, the Internet was still a lot of news groups. And one of those news groups, which I started going to every day, was alt.paranet.ufo. And at that time, I'm sure it's kind of dead now, but there were a lot of people who would go on there and they would post their very articles and information. And I just, it was a real education for me, because I realized that there were some sophisticated people out there who were also puzzling over some political implications of the UFO phenomenon. And it was around 1995. And then it crystallized. There was a thought that came into my head, which was that I wanted to do a political analysis of the UFO reality and cover-up. But before I did that, I was actually looking for a book that that would sort of have already done that for me. I was really looking for the book that I ended up writing. There wasn't such a book, so I wrote it, and that was UFOs and the National Security State. My attitude was always, there should be a good 500-page book on any topic under the sun that covers everything. 500 pages, I thought, that's a nice, hefty amount. And there wasn't, in my opinion, so I ended up writing it. Basically a historical narrative and analysis of here's what happened, and then here's what happened, and then here's what happened, without too much grandstanding and clearly. And that's really what got me out there. That was published in 2000, and my life has been different ever since. Ever since.
Do you find that you had a terrific amount of interest in this new genre of your work once you changed tack, but once you began, you wrote that book, you began to get responses?
Oh yeah. Well, it didn't take me long to do a complete 180-degree turn from very little interest to an overwhelming amount of interest. Now, I remember the very first year that I researched this, I literally would lie awake in bed at night staring at the ceiling, not from being traumatized by the information so much as trying to figure out the missing pieces of the puzzle of our world, thinking, well, if this is a reality, which it certainly looks like it is, then what does that say about all of our official political history? When I look at the U.S. presidential administrations, Eisenhower, Kennedy, there has to be something that we're not getting here, right? What is it? And so that has always been something that has puzzled me. And if I have any life's work at all, I think it's to try to mainstream our official history with this other reality and to see how well I can put things together so that they're logical. Once I became publicly known in this field, once it was a 5-year project to get that first book done, that changed my life completely, because what I realized is that, there were other interested students of this field who actually liked my book, and that was that was something to get used to. But then the real thing was that a lot of these individuals with a lot of knowledge, some of them with background in the intelligence community, came out of the woodwork and actually would write to me and say things like, very good job, here's a little more information, and just other researchers providing leads. It was a tremendous experience. The first few years of being a public person in this field took a lot to get used to. And then at the same time, I was still trying to catch up. My first volume of history only went from the early 1940s to the early 70s. There's a whole lot of years after 1973 that I hadn't yet covered and that I wasn't yet expert at. And I remember, like, all in 01 and 02 and 03, just getting up to speed with the more recent years, working very hard. And, I mean, eventually I think that I did. But it was a very active time, and I can't even remember how many times my worldview just got shattered and remade over and over. Over and over.
I think one of the things that I'm aware of and other people talk about you is that you really do have this breath of fresh air approach or input into this subject, which probably up until your publication, Richard, it was quite a stuffy, nobody was really moving the boundaries, that's what I want to say, and your work seems to have really expanded upon those boundaries, and that's great credit to you. But you went out to have this real kind of inquiring mind satisfied, and I think it must have been a great privilege for you when you began to discover that people were starting to give you those little bits of extra information, and that must have been quite something, Richard.
Oh, indeed. Well, I really appreciate you saying that so very much. When I first published that book in 2000, I do feel that it was a very radical kind of book at the time. It's funny, when I look back at that book, I think it's kind of conservative. I would actually go way farther in a lot of my analysis now than I did then. But at the time, I took a lot of grief, actually, from some of the more entrenched UFO researchers in the United States, who really thought that I was attacking the CIA too much, and I'm thinking, who are these people? Like, will you just go back into your little cave and die? I was thinking with some of these people, just go away and go back to your world of irrelevancy. But there was a lot of that. What happened, though, shortly after that book was published was 9/11. And what that did is it really actually radicalized so much of Western culture because of the reaction against the draconian measures of the Bush administration. It actually, I think, pushed progressive thinkers into a much more radical mode, so that my analysis that I wrote in the late 90s almost seemed like kind of tame. Which is great. That's fine. I'm happy with that. But yes, I've always, my attitude has always been to be as unencumbered, I hope, as by ego as I can, and just simply to throw myself into the topic. It's the phenomenon that rules. It's not me. It's not about me. And I know full well that I've been wrong about many things. I'm sure I'll be wrong about things in the future. And so it's all about trying to understand this incredible mystery.
Isn't that the best indication of healthy research, though, is that what you may or may not believe at one stage of your research should be allowed to change and mold with your own research increasing?
Absolutely. The problem that you have in a public realm, I've seen this and I've felt it, and I've so far been able to resist it. But the thing is, once you put yourself out there and then other people start actually to follow you, which has happened to me, there is a certain amount of pressure. I mean, it really exists on a public person to maintain, those attitudes and positions that got them known. And that's a real danger. Yeah. You've got to be unafraid to throw that away, and if need be, reinvent yourself and think about things fresh, because otherwise you ossify and you're really not, you cease at that moment to look at this in a fresh way. So there's a certain amount of bravery, as crazy as it sounds, to you have to have in this field to be unafraid of throwing away previous beliefs that really were cherished.
I think that's terrific, and I think the fact that you can say it so publicly and not just panic about it privately and hide behind something is just all the more admirable, because we are what we are, none of us are super perfect, superhuman, far from it.
No, I mean, we all have our public armor that we want to wear, but what I've discovered is the best armor, honestly, is submission to the truth. And if I just keep doing that, then I figure I'll be okay.
I think that's wonderful. I'm going to ask you, before Ben and Ants come on, just a couple of questions about things that were happening recently at the Citizens' Hearing back in May. And you were actually, I'm going to ask you to tell some of our listeners who are not aware of what the citizens' hearing was about. I'm going to ask you to tell them a little bit about it. But you were actually a witness at that, the citizens' hearing, and it was held in Washington, D.C., where the four former Congress, former Congress members pledged support for a proposal that's been drafted to the United Nations, suggesting that they hold a world conference addressing the possible evidence of an extraterrestrial presence engaging in this planet,
exactly
or with this planet. Is this where you see the UFO disclosure and advocacy movement going, Richard, in the future?
Well, I think it's one direction. I think that's one direction where it might go. Just as a recap, the citizen hearing was an incredibly ambitious and I think successful undertaking organized by my colleague and friend Stephen Bassett over here in the United States. To as a week-long, it's a mock congressional hearing. That's exactly what it was meant to be, and that's what it was, where 40 researchers and witnesses, I was one of those 40, provided testimony all week to 6 retired members of the United States Congress, one of whom was a senator and 5 members of Congress, on various aspects of the UFO reality and the cover-up.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think that I gave more testimony than any other single person. I actually submitted 6 pieces of testimony, plus I did a lecture one evening, so I was very busy all week. Yeah. It was an honor for me to be part of this, and there's a lot of these clips on YouTube. Anyone can go find them. Yeah. Essentially, what I saw during that week was the transformation of these members of Congress, retired, but nonetheless, recently retired. Transforming from, clearly a kind of a skeptical attitude, almost thinking like, why am I even here? To by the end of the week, all of them, no exception, all of them were deeply engaged in this issue. And they weren't all willing to say, oh yes, it's absolutely extraterrestrial, but they were all willing to say, this is a matter of an important matter of public policy, and it does deserve open political treatment and investigation, and it's wrong that all of this is happening. Something is happening, and it's not getting the attention it deserves. So they were all willing to go out there and make that statement. Yeah. What you were mentioning about the proposal for the United Nations, I actually had a very small, really small part in talking about that. My very good friend, the attorney Daniel Sheehan, really is the one who drew that up. Mm-hmm. But Danny and I and another researcher, Antonio Huneas, were talking about this and trying to figure out what's the best strategy. Because by the end of the week, we really wanted to have something tangible to present, just like something more than just a whole week of talk, and then nothing. So there is this proposal, and we drew this up. And I think the United Nations is probably as appropriate a venue as I can think of. And people want to bitch about the UN, they do it all the time. But really, what's better? When you really think of it as an international tool, because UFO phenomenon is global. It's not just U.S., it's not just U.K., it's everywhere. And so it's something that affects the whole world, and I think the UN is appropriate. But I think in terms of future of disclosure, there have to be multiple tracks, and one is certainly through formal political channels, but the other thing is none of this is going to matter if we are kind of stuck without mass public support. Yeah. Nothing's going to happen on this limited, restricted basis without engaging the public on a broader issue. And how do you engage the public on a broader issue? I would say not through dealing with scientific, technical aspects. No one really gives a crap about that. But what they do care about are the moral, ethical issues of a cover-up, of rule by secrecy, and of the realization that our future is being held hostage. That is our future in terms of acquired exotic technology. I think is an excellent argument on this. I've been making it for years myself. And also just the destruction of democratic representative government. You've got this very important issue that's clearly going on. Why, oh why, is the public being treated like little children, being spoon-fed information that's been pre-chewed by elite corporate media anyway? This is nonsense. This is beneath us. We deserve better, and we should demand better. So I think if we can engage the public, and this is where we have not been able to succeed yet. I don't think that we will continue to fail. I think that there are ways we can succeed, but we've got to do better by engaging the public. What I found, I want to give you a chance to get back in this conversation.
No, this is wonderful.
What I think, though, is I've noticed this. I'll bet you've noticed this. When you talk to people privately about this topic, you find that the light bulbs start turning on over their head. They think, wow, this is actually very interesting. I hadn't really thought about this. So the potential is absolutely there to reach ordinary people and to show them, I think, concisely and clearly why this topic matters. And, I mean, I do this all the time. I'm in situations frequently where I'm with small groups right here where I live. Just a few days ago, I was asked to give a talk to a local civics club that was like 20 members. They knew nothing about UFOs. This was something totally different. Some even told me beforehand they were openly skeptical. But by the end, I just gave a 20-minute chat. That was it. I could see. I mean, honestly, I could see they were all just like, oh, my God, I want more. And really, the way that I do it is I simply explain, look, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what your government thinks, what your military thinks, and we have enough evidence through declassified literature to show that this is actually a very big deal. And people become interested. But that's what we have to do. We have to figure out a way to engage the public better. The conferences like this, what Anthony Beckett is organizing, the Exopolitics Leads Conference, which he's now done, this is the 5th year, I think these types of events are important. The growing amount of internet web radio, which you're doing, I think is important. There's all different avenues that we need to explore, and I think there is a growing public movement to disseminate the information. Compare this with 20, 30 years ago. It's tremendous. So I think we are making strides, and I think we'll make more in the future.
I have to ask you this question, and it's something which comes up, and it's a criticism about some people's view of the whole of the disclosure subject. Let's say, and we're talking about the success here of what you described at the citizens' hearing back in May in Washington D.C., but there's quite a large body of people who criticize this and say this entire disclosure thing is a covert, or rather overt, vehicle, even though it's supposedly a way for the government to step by step allow the disclosure movement to release basically what governments worldwide want us to do, which is to get the idea that yes, by all means, there is more to life than on this planet. There certainly is an extraterrestrial presence engaging with this planet. But the criticism from some people, and that they're not just knocking it for the sake of it. They're saying nothing's happening, and yet we could say, well, hang on, it is. We've just had this, the citizens' hearing. Here's an example. But how do you feel about that criticism of this is the whole disclosure movement is just a government vehicle, world government vehicle for basically letting us be allowed to kind of think, oh yes, great, we're finally going to get some truth about extraterrestrial life, when really it's just a way to get people on board to accept it in a way that the government don't appear to be doing the driving. How do you feel about that sort of? It's quite common. I hear a lot,
Well, it's a very nuanced position. Mm-hmm. It's somewhat analogous. I don't really know if that's true. If it is true, then I myself have been co-opted by it. I guess I have to say, because I've allowed myself to throw myself into it. But think of it this way: let's say that you and I are a high-level CIA or whatever, and we know the truth on this, and we think this truth has to come out at some point. Mm-hmm. So our job might be to find a way to help some information get out, because we realize we can't get it out all at once, because that actually could be highly disruptive. So you do it by degrees. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's really what you're saying,
Yeah.
Or,
that's.
I mean, a quiet sort of disclosure. What in the CIA they call a limited hangout. This is actually a phrase that they use.
Right.
In other words, you throw a little piece of information out there, and then you run away from it so that it's an orphan. It has no provenance, but it's out there now as a meme, as a theme in the public. This is actually something that I think intelligence communities do. They talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, the question is the disclosure movement one of these things? Well, you have to ask yourself, the disclosure movements have been, the phrase disclosure itself, I think really came into the lexicon, if I'm not mistaken, to Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
The argument could be that he's one of these people. Mm-hmm. I don't know him well enough to make a point one way or the other about this. I mean, I've met Stephen a number of times, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Well, what I will say is, it's almost irrelevant. It's because it's not as if they're trying to stop it. They can't stop it. See, my take on disclosure is this. It is. I've often said it's a great paradox. The disclosure of the UFO reality is impossible at the same time that it's inevitable. It's impossible just in the sense that there is really no motivation that I see that those people who've got this secret ever truly want it to come out. I just see it's too disruptive, it's too much of a game changer, and there really can be no motivation. And by the way, I've had a couple of very interesting conversations with individuals, a couple of them famous. One day I'll give their names up, I promise. But one of them said to me that this topic of disclosure comes up every 5 or 10 years, actually. It does come up at high levels in Washington. It's discussed, and every time they think, well, no, it's too explosive and we're not going to do it. But it's a matter that does percolate at the top levels. So that's why it's impossible, but it's inevitable. And the reason disclosure is inevitable has nothing to do with the powers that be. They can't control this. We're living in a world that is going through revolution, technologically, socially, politically, economically, where everything is in flux. Primarily, it's the technological and social revolution that is going to drive this. Think about it this way. WikiLeaks and groups like Anonymous, which have become a real force in this world. They didn't exist 10 years ago because they couldn't exist 10 years ago because we didn't have the global technological infrastructure to allow for it. But now we have that infrastructure, and guess what? They're here and they're making a lot of waves. How long do you think it will be, really, before an explosive UFO secret or series of documents gets leaked out? I think it really can happen. Yeah. Or a sighting that now with everyone with their smartphones can record and in multiple recordings. Now, I mean, you could argue, well, why haven't we seen this already? But I think we're starting to see it, actually. Yeah. I think we're starting to see a lot of video. Of course, a lot's faked. But I do really think it's a matter of time before something happens, something unexpected, something sudden that forces this issue open. And I want to speak to one other criticism. You didn't mention this, but I hear it frequently of the disclosure effort, which is, well, don't you think it's naive that you really think the United States president is going to disclose anything? That's foolish. And to which I would answer, it would be if that's actually what we thought, but no, I don't know anyone who actually thinks, no one who's serious. I mean, there are predictions made all the time by some people, self-proclaimed experts who think, oh yeah, Obama's going to disclose. Yeah. Well, I've never said that. I mean, I've never, ever considered those things credible. What I think is most likely is that if a U.S. president or a U.K. prime minister or any other big shot ever talks about this publicly, it will only be because they were forced to by external events, and they will continue to lie, they will continue to spin, they will continue to try to control the topic to the best of their ability, but at least it will be out there on the open, and we will be able to dispute them in public on it. That'll be the one difference.
We are talking to Richard Dolan, and you're listening to Planet X Live.
You're listening to Planet X. Planet X, the biggest paranormal show on radio. From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth, this is Planet X.
Coming in September 2013, the 5th annual British Exopolitics Expo with Richard M. Dolan, Professor Chandra, Wickramasing, Marcus Allen, Andrew Johnson and myself, Anthony Beckett. Exopolitics Great Britain presents The Secrets of the Solar System.
I think it's true to say, isn't it, that if your theory is correct, life not only may be spread throughout the universe, it must be.
Surely there must be many places where this has happened. Do you have an idea of the numbers?
The numbers must be very favourable, Fred, isn't it? There are billions of stars in the galaxy which are probably very similar to the Sun, and very similar to the extent of being able to support planetary systems. So it would really be very surprising if life is not, if the galaxy is not just teeming with life.
To me, the story in the solar system is much, much richer than we've been led to believe, and I think there are people around that know this, and they've got to manage the disclosure of knowledge about this, perhaps this is what, again, is going, as you say, to the Brookings Institution report, it kind of alludes to this sort of thing.
We are probably the greatest show in this quadrant of the galaxy. I guarantee you, any other intelligences that are watching this area are saying, humanity, wow, check it out. Check out the show.
There's clear evidence that cannot be denied, but we are denying it. We are in a state of denial. And when facts as clear as this are being denied, I think we are not dealing with science, but we're dealing with politics.
So it does appear to me that this very thing that they allude to is already going on and has been going on for quite some time under our very noses. But it's couched in ways that we don't, are not immediately obvious. So we think that it's just scientists going about their business and being very non-committal about things, And this is, of course, I think for some of us that are speaking at the conference, very frustrating. Certainly for myself, it's very frustrating to have this sort of, sitting on the fence all the time and not delving into this more deeply and getting some higher quality answers.
Held at the University of Huddersfield in West Yorkshire on Saturday, September 28th. Book online at exopoliticsgb.com or see Nexus magazine in shops now for further details. Exopolitics Great Britain, this is Disclosure.
Planet X, online, on your mobile.
Okay guys, it's now that time to see who's the lucky winners to the competition that we have going for the last 6 weeks. We've had quite a lot of entries into it, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask Anthony to pick a number between 1 and 768. Now this is, don't forget, for 2 tickets to gain entry into the expo and 3 DVD box sets of your choice. I hope I win this. And don't forget, the other good bonus is going to be is that you'll meet the Planet X team while you're down there. We're all going to be there. You'll see Neil, and you'll see Ames, and you'll see Ben, and hopefully you may see me. What a surprise.
Oh, stretching.
Okay, so let's do it. And now I'm going to ask Anthony to pick a number between 1 and 768. Anthony.
Hi, Dave. 411.
411, right. Just hit the button. Yay, and we've got a winner, and the winner on the forum is Watcher67, and that is Alison Joseph. So, Alison, you're the lucky winner of 2 tickets to the expo and 3 DVD box sets. What we will
Congratulations,
do...
Alison.
Yeah, congratulations, well done.
Congratulations, Alison, well done. See you there.
Well done, Alison.
Come and say hello to us. We're all very friendly people. What we'll do,
We'll have to interview her.
Yeah, we could do. What we'll do is we'll send an email off to you and ask you what DVD box sets you want, and I don't know, Anthony, is she going to collect the tickets at the door, or are you going to send them out?
Well, no, it's like everybody else, we'll just collect the tickets at the door, so Alison will do the same. We'll just have the tickets waiting for when she gets there.
Fantastic. Alison, well done, and I hope you enjoy the day.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups, this is Planet X.
Ants, you were going to ask Richard something.
Yes, Richard. Last week the media was awash with stories reporting that the CIA had acknowledged the existence of Area 51, albeit avoided any UFO craft. it seems kind of strange that given about 10 years ago the same thing happened, and it's not really been a secret for about a decade. Why do you think this might
exactly? Well, I mean, I was so puzzled by why this story became such a big thing. Now I do understand why, but I mean, realistically, this is no admission whatsoever. The news was, oh yes, the CIA admits there is an Area 51, and here's its history. It started in 1955, and all of these other things that everyone else in the world already knew. Oh, I mean, this is like the biggest open secret in the world. Yeah, man, there's an Area 51. Well, actually, the whole story came about through, and this is almost sad, through a grindingly slow Freedom of Information Act request that happened here in the States. So I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago, someone filed a FOIA request relating to a particular classified study that the CIA had done that talks about the history of Area 51. And it took all of those years for this to become declassified. I mean, that alone is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So the release of that study is what prompted the news coverage. But in fact, you're absolutely right. It had been there had been a number of formal government admissions already that, yes, of course there's an Area 51. You'll notice, though, that in the recent media coverage, once again, they have to do this. It's as knee-jerk in the U.S. as it is in the U.K., which you have to disable any connection at all to UFOs. And normally they'll do it by subtle ridicule, like, no little green men, things like this. And that's what all the coverage was replete with. So it was, oh yeah, well they've created Area 51 as a way to, as a place to test the U-2 and the Blackbird, and, all of that. We all know that. But of course, what they typically neglected to point out is that the world actually learned about Area 51 via the UFO connection back in 1989 and 1990, when Bob Lazar was really the first person to go public and start talking about this place called Area 51, and he did it explicitly through a connection with the UFO phenomenon, and explicitly by saying 10 miles south of Area 51 is a place called S4, and that's where they've got ET technology that they're trying to figure out. I mean, that's how we learned about Area 51. So ever since, of course, you've got this connection, and you have to wonder, well, is there truth to it? I happen to think that there is truth to it, yes. I certainly do. But, of course, our media is just the most ridiculous. I mean, is there anyone listening to this show by now who actually still doubts that the media in the entire Western world is really part of a fascist nexus? I mean, that's really, how else do you put it? It's media connected with corporate, connected with government/intelligence community interests. They're all one thing. They all work as one entity, giving an illusion of independence, and it's a very minor one. You have all the range of opinions expressed from A to B, and C to Z are just off limits, basically. That's our spectrum here in the States. It's really the same, I think, in your country. So that's the media. It's it's almost like the old Soviet system. It's that bad. It's that bad, with the difference that here in the West, in the corporate countries here, there's still got to be this fig leaf of pretense of free inquiry. But it's everything's bought and sold. Anyone in the U.S. media and the UK media has been bought and paid for a long time ago, and they wouldn't be able to get where they are.
On your interview with the dying witness you recorded back in March, who claims to have been but President Eisenhower threatened to invade Area 51. Did that actually make it into the mainstream media at all?
That was a fascinating meeting that I had with this gentleman, and for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's on YouTube. I think it's gone viral many times. I interviewed a man who is not well. He's in his late 70s, and his health is failing. as we speak here. And I actually met with him over the space of 2 days for a total of several hours, not just 17 minutes, which is on YouTube. And there will be more of that interview that will be released, I'm told by the producers of that video. But yeah, I have his military papers, actually. It's called his DD-214. I have a copy of it. I also got to know and talk at length with his son-in-law, who I think is a great guy and knows his father-in-law's story inside and out. And I spoke with the gentleman, and essentially his story is that he was in Army intelligence in the late 1950s and got recruited by CIA. And this was in signals intelligence, where he was dealing with UFO-related information that was coming in from Europe. He had a lot to say about that, and the really explosive thing that he had to say was that his boss, who was a CIA station chief, was ordered by President Eisenhower, and the two of them went, and he said they met President Eisenhower, and they were told to fly out to Area 51. Again, this is the late 1950s, and there's certainly, Area 51 was operational by that point, for sure. And the problem, Eisenhower had told them, was that he had been unable to get real information about what actually was going on there and to what extent, like, the TET-related research programs were, how far they had progressed and so forth. And Eisenhower said, I am so unhappy with the lack of information coming out of there that if I don't get good information coming from you two as a result of this, then I'm sending the 1st Army out of Fort Carlson, Colorado, and we're going to invade Area 51. He's going to take over Area 51 with the 1st Army. That was what this man said to me. And I can tell you, when I heard him say that, my eyebrows went way up on my head. What do you do with information like that? I certainly cannot confirm this. I don't know how anyone can confirm this. It may never have gone down on a piece of paper, ever. This might have just been something that Eisenhower was thinking, for all we know. So there may very well be no paper trail of it, and there may be no way ever of proving this. But that is what this man said to me. And the only other thing I'll just say relating to this man is that, because a lot of people have commented that, he's truthful or he's not truthful, I can just say that my interactions with him, by the end of my time with this man, I really loved this guy. He is an absolutely sweet, genuine man, in my opinion. I do think it is possible that some of the things that he said to me were the result of a confused state of mind. He was on medications when I met with him. His health was not good. And I think on a lot of matters his memory really truly was foggy. So I will give him some slack, and I think that he may have said some things to me that actually might be mistaken, but I do not believe he was lying. And I think on the fundamentals that he was truthful with me. A couple of other things he mentioned, by the way, is that when he went to Area 51, he was with his boss, and then there were 2 other CIA guys there, and then an Area 51 officer who toured them. He said he saw a Roswell craft. This is on the YouTube video. It was very light. You could move it up and down like by hand. It was incredibly light. He said he saw an alien autopsy video, or film, I guess, not really video. And the other thing that he said, and I don't believe that this was on the YouTube video. I just recently re-watched it. But he said that he saw that he and his group encountered a live being behind a glass. The being was wearing ordinary clothing, like human clothing, but he wasn't human, and communicated somehow telepathically. And the one message that this being said was, "We mean you no harm." That's, literally what this man said to me. They went back to D.C. They, according to what he said, they spoke to President Eisenhower, and he said Vice President Richard Nixon was there. Excuse me. And he also said FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was there. So pretty 3 famous, powerful people. And he said that they gave Eisenhower the report of everything that was going on. Eisenhower very quietly thanked them, did not really say a whole lot after that, and dismissed them. That's essentially what he said about that. And it's a major kind of dramatic statement, I wish that there were a way that I or some other researcher could confirm this or disprove it one way or the other. Maybe there will be a way to do so. I haven't been able to do anything yet in terms of confirming this man's story, but I will just say that I believe his honesty, and I'm hoping that at some point we can corroborate some of this.
Ben,
yeah,
you wanted to ask Richard something.
Oh yeah, I've really enjoyed the show, Richard. Thanks for coming on. That's been really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe I've spoken to you before about this. Now, because I mean, I've read two of your books, including AD, After Disclosure, the one you co-wrote with Bryce Zabel. And I find this whole concept of disclosure irresistible. It's so attractive. And I mean, I'm really, it's a dream that captivates me. Like yourself, I'm quite obsessed with this subject. And I do believe one day we will know the truth. However, when I look at the political structures of the world today, and I wonder if they have the capacity to process a revelation of this magnitude. And I mean, it's because I started contemplating the implications of disclosure, which are, I mean, they're almost more than I can possibly imagine. I mean, you're talking, I mean, it's so much I can hardly describe it, but just concentrating on the energy issue, the technology, because this blends into free energy and anti-gravity technology of terrestrial origin, like Nikola Tesla and other inventors, which goes back well over a century now. It's the cover-up of this technology, whether it be ET or terrestrial in origin, has killed vast numbers of people. It's caused an unbelievable amount of environmental destruction. It's been the source for so many wars. I mean, I do wonder how
exactly.
I mean, it's not just how it would change if these discoveries came out. It's the fact that this cover-up existed. They'll have to admit it existed, and they put this cover-up in place for their benefit, not for ours. I mean, they're going to say sorry. You talked before about a loss of credibility on their part. I think that's got to be the understatement of the century.
Well, these are themes. Everything that you mentioned here really has been a theme of my own thinking and did factor into AD After Disclosure. All of these and more are absolutely just political dynamite. I totally agree with you. By the time we finished, at least from my perspective, and I think Bryce will agree, by the time we finished this book, we realized, very easy to see why there's a cover-up, because unveiling this would rip everything just wide open.
Yeah.
Wide open. And the energy paradigm, I feel that's really at the center of why this whole thing is slammed down as tight as it is, because as I often think about it, even a 10-year-old child seeing the performance of a flying saucer instantly accelerating, doing a zigzag, going straight up, is going to be able to tell that that's not using fossil fuels. Whatever it is using, it's not petroleum. It's something better. And so implicit in the UFO phenomenon is a post-petroleum energy paradigm. And that being said, petroleum is I don't know now, it's either the largest or one of the very largest industries in the world. I mean, we have a petroleum world. Our whole global infrastructure is really petroleum-based. So if you change out of that, even under the best circumstances, it's going to be a mess.
It's not just the economic and business and finance. It's politics. This is the lubricant of our societies, oil.
Absolutely in every way. So you can see that there would be a lot of resistance to this, and that's just one. And the fact that there's been this deep cover-up and our future being held hostage. I agree with you about Tesla technology and all that's related to it. Free energy, in whatever form it exists, would revolutionize our world in ways that I'm sure we cannot even fathom, honestly. And it's all being held from us. Maybe if we were at the top of the human pyramid, we would think, you can't let the little people have that because then things would really get crazy. Maybe they would. I don't know, right? Who knows? But from our point of view, hey, we're looking at a petroleum paradigm that is finite. It's obvious this is not going to last, and it cannot last forever. Not just petroleum, but our whole nuclear industry. I mean, I'm looking at what's going on at Fukushima, and we have been Fukushima badly by that thing. The radiation is spewing out. And this is also part of the problem, because if we had these better technologies online, we wouldn't be having these types of catastrophes. So, yeah, I think it's exactly right. This is a huge political, in every way, the disclosure of this reality promises to rip our world wide open. And honestly, I don't think that we will ever be ready for it. I don't think the political institutions will ever be ready, and I don't think that most of humanity will ever be ready psychologically. But that won't stop it from happening. That's the thing. We're going to hate it for a while because it's going to disrupt everything, but who's ever ready to have their first child? No one. We're not going to be ready for this either. It's just going to be there because it's an inevitable part of the development of our society. We can't help ourselves. This truth is coming out. This is, you think about how our world has changed in the last 10 years, let alone 20, 30, 50 years. It's unreal. It's unreal. Where are we going to be in another 20 years? One of the things that I explored in AD was simply the future of computing technology. We're probably less than 20 years away from your computer and mine being able to talk to us intelligently with genius-level IQ. And they won't need sleep and they won't need coffee. They'll just be going nonstop. And we'll be able to ask them all kinds of crazy questions. I'm serious here. Why? We're moving into quantum computing. We're moving into things that are going to destabilize the hierarchical structure. Another thing that we're moving into is 3D printing. This is something people really got to understand. 3D printing is going to revolutionize the world of manufacturing in the way that the internet has revolutionized the world of ideas. What will happen is you'll have a 3D printer in your home, and you'll be able to download a 3D design of not just coffee cups and little knickknacks, which is what they have now, but actual, hey, what if some smart person in China or India or UK or Los Angeles comes up with the design of a free energy device? And they
that's a solution.
They'll be like, right, 3D printing plus like a future version of the Pirate Bay, and bingo, you're going to have this stuff, it's going to get out. It's going to be impossible to contain. Trying to censor the internet is like cutting off a head of the Hydra. You cut one head off, and two are going to pop up. We're going to see this happen, I think, in the next decade or so. We're primed. If not disclosure of the ET reality, then something like a 3D printing, where, in other words, it's like, the old image of the dike keeping the ocean out. Well, the dike's getting a lot of holes in it, and there's only so many they can plug in, and here comes the ocean. You can't stop it.
Yeah, of course. With 3D printing, and all you'll need is the raw materials, and this machine will just produce the device for you. And about the cold fusion affair in 1989, I believe, or 1990. There was the cold fusion. That's actually that whole cold fusion. Yeah, it dates back to 1920. That was first discovered. The anomalous heat effect, as it was called, was actually first discovered in 1920, and it's been covered up all this time. But
it's that long ago. That's fascinating. Didn't realize that's interesting.
It does date back. Obviously there's a lot of determination. You talked about the internet, Richard. There has been recent attempts in this country to try and bring in internet filters, and they've used some very, very tragic and horrible cases about people being abused online and even committing suicide as a result, in order to try and justify it. But I think, I feel optimistic, Richard, I do, and as I said, I find this whole area, enticing beyond belief.
Oh, we're living in the most unbelievable time, and we forget, because we wake up and today's kind of like yesterday, and tomorrow is going to be kind of like today. But when you look back over like a 10-year span, it's unbelievable the transformation that we've gone through and that we're going to continue to go through. So it's just very important, I think, we have to keep our head, we have to stay calm, but we also have to be brave and realize we have to think on our feet, because the next 5 years is going to be very different from what we're currently living in. All I can see is general outlines of what's ahead. The specifics, who knows when things are going to change in one way or another. But I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of change in the next generation, big time.
Oh, yeah.
Richard, this is wonderful. But I want to ask you that just a little while ago in your research, you wrote about something which involved an extraterrestrial virus, and the collaboration of that work. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Oh, Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm an author, but I'm also a publisher. My publishing company has just been renamed. It's called Richard Dolan Press. And I really love what I do. I love the fact that I'm able to accept really innovative works by so many authors and help them get their work out to the public. The book you're referring to is called Alien Viruses, and it's by Robert Wood, who is a PhD. He's 85 years old. Bob Wood is, but his health is incredible, and he's just so active. The subtitle of his book is, I'm trying to think offhand, UFOs, MJ-12, and Biowarfare. And really what his argument is, now Bob Wood is an expert at what are called the majestic documents. And anyone can go to majesticdocuments.com and check out his website that he runs with his son Ryan. The majestic documents are a series of highly controversial, disputed, but I would say leaked documents. And if you print all of them up, it would be about, well, I'm still using inches here, it would be about 2 inches thick of paper. So it's a lot. It's a lot of paper. There's a lot of these documents. And Bob Wood has studied them more than probably anyone else in the world, in my opinion. Yeah. And what he has done, he not only believes that they are authentic, which I happen to agree with him in that assessment, but he's gone into them and looked for references that deal with alien biology and viruses and anything's related to this, and he has put together an argument. And the argument is that a great deal of our modern biowarfare industry actually derives from the clandestine secret study of alien biology and viruses. That's his fundamental argument. Now, he may be right, he may be wrong, but I will tell you this is it's a beautifully put together book. In fact, it was ghostwritten by one of my favorite researchers in the field, also from the UK, and that's Nick Redfern. Yeah. Well, I just have tremendous respect for Nick, and he's a really good writer, and I think they worked very well on this. It's all Bob's research and Bob's thinking, but Nick really polished it and put it together in a nice way. So that's the book. Bob approached me earlier this year and asked if I would consider publishing it, and I said, absolutely, I respect your work so much. So that book came out in very early July of this year, so just not even 2 months ago, and it's I think people are telling me they like it very much. It's getting good reviews. It's selling very nicely, I'm happy to say. And yeah, it's called Alien Viruses by Robert M. Wood. I would encourage people to go to my website, richarddolanpress.com. You go check it out, and you can see that book and a variety of others that I'm publishing right now.
That's terrific. And have there been any subjects that you have been led to through this publishing venture that you haven't come across before?
Let's see. Well, it's only in the last year that I have really expanded what I do as a publisher. Yeah, there's one book I published about a year ago by a woman named Eve Lorgan. This is something that I normally would not have gone into on my own, but I ended up publishing a book. It's called The Dark Side of Cupid. It's not really a UFO book. It's one of these, I think everyone at some point in their life has wondered, gee, why did I fall in love with that person? Was there an outside influence that made me do it? Cupid, right? I mean, I think we probably in our minds we've all wondered. And what Eve has done is she's actually explored this, whether it's through ET or some other kind of paranormal influence or whatever. And she looks at a variety of couples who have weird stories to tell, and she collected it and put that together in a book, and that's called The Dark Side of Cupid. And basically what she's arguing in that book is that there sometimes are very not nice forces that act upon us or seem to act upon us and bring people together for whatever reason. That's her book, and I ended up publishing it, and this is not something that I ordinarily in my research would have gotten into, but I'm glad I published it, and I think a number of people have said that they feel it's an eye-opener type of a book. I published a book just recently on the triangle UFO phenomenon. There's never been a full-length book on triangular UFOs, but there's one now, and it's by David Marler, an American researcher. A lot of people don't know David, but I think they're getting to know him now. He has just done stellar research. He has a newspaper archive that is one of the best I've ever seen. And he has used it to excellent effect to put together a long, long history of crystal clear triangular UFO sightings that go way, way, way back. And he has a lot to say on it. It's a very interesting book, and that's another one that I publish. And I'm actually about to publish my own book in another month, which is called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And you can think of that book as basically a fresh introduction to the entire field. 300 pages. If you have a friend or a cousin or an uncle or someone who's skeptical about UFOs and they've never read about it, my feeling is this would be the book you'd want to give them. It really gives a complete overview of this crazy but fascinating phenomenon. Not just the history, which I've always focused on. There is that. But also an analysis of the politics, and a deep analysis of the politics. And then there's a chapter that I deal with that just tries to understand what is and what is not a UFO, particularly in our day and age now of drones, both public and private, of YouTube fakery and all of that stuff. That's an important thing to understand, and I try to address that. I have a chapter dealing with weird science of UFOs, everything from propulsion technology to space-time to dimensions to consciousness itself. I think, all of these are cutting-edge scientific issues. All of them have an effect on the UFO phenomenon, and I try to deal with it in a way that's comprehensible, clear, but sophisticated for a reader. I have a chapter on disclosure. I've got a chapter on, almost like psychological issues. What I've noticed is many people who get into this field that kind of lose their head. Yeah. And really it happens. They get, it's a reality bender. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of everything, but I think it's a very good dive in a fresh way into what I feel is the most fascinating mystery of our time.
Do you cover the issue of holographic projections of UFOs at all in your work? I've come across this.
I address it in this book, yeah. I should mention I have 2 chapters on the nature of contact, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road. What are we dealing with? Yeah. But yes, as far as holographic projections, you might be thinking of something Project Blue Beam. This has been discussed for about almost 20 years now. I have mixed feelings about the viability, to be honest with you, of how something like that would succeed. I certainly I've argued for years that there are false flags all the time. I'll go to my grave saying that 9/11 was an inside job of one sort or another. There's a lot of those types of things. So governments lie. There's very sophisticated black budget programs that are in place to lie and deceive and manipulate the public. We're in the middle of one right now in relation to this whole mess in Syria, by the way, but I'll just leave that for the moment. Now the question is Blue Beam, and for anyone who is not familiar with this, the idea being of a kind of like a fake alien invasion, essentially to scare the shit out of you, if I can say that, and think, oh my God, aliens are here, protect me, big brother. Protect me, military complex. Here are my rights. Yay, fascism. Right? So that's the idea of like a Blue Beam scenario. And here's my argument against Blue Beam. Okay, I have a couple of them, actually. First of all, when you look at the history of Blue Beam, the origin of it, it actually comes from a very dodgy source, honestly. And it's a fellow named Serge Monas, who is a French-Canadian from Quebec, who really did, I have to say this, I don't mean to sound mean, but he didn't get out much. He claimed that he had this connection at NASA. I mean, NASA, who said to him, yes, there's this plan, and we're going to scare the hell out of the world, and we're going to... And Monas was also like an evangelical Christian, too, and so part of his scenario was that by the year 2000, he's writing in the early 1990s, by the year 2000 there was going to be fake alien invasion and also fake archaeological discoveries that will weaken the faith of Christians, And where's all this coming from? So, and actually, a very good researcher friend of mine analyzed all of that and literally found the source, I think he's exactly right, of Monas's idea in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh, wow.
I think he really nailed it. Now, that doesn't invalidate the idea of holographic projections. That could be a whole different thing. So let's just look at that. To have a holographic projection of an ET craft, let's just say, what's the purpose of it? Is it to create a global fascism? Well, we're already doing that. It's already happening.
Sure.
All right, you don't really need, I mean, something like a blue beam fake alien invasion scenario is so risky. Think about the logistics. How do you do this? You don't just have a world of skeptical scientists. You have a world of utterly hostile scientists to anything having to do with this. You got a tall order. Maybe you can scare the hell out of our neighbors, okay? But, you know, there's a lot of these scientists who've made their whole career thinking this is all nonsense. And you're going to convince them with a fake invasion of a craft? How long is that going to last? Are you actually going to produce an ET body? It seems to me that it doesn't make sense. And then it's all predicated on the idea, because a lot of the people who talk about blue beam, I think they assume that there's no such thing as actual aliens here. So if there are no aliens, then I suppose the argument might work for a little while. But if there are, then you're going on the assumption that they're not going to do anything about it. I mean, one thing that I've seen with this UFO phenomenon all these years is that, try as you might, you can't control what these objects do. They have their own agenda. They do their own thing. So I'm just, you know, the idea of a false flag alien invasion has always left me cold, to be honest with you. I just am not persuaded. I can change my mind. And I'll tell you this. If there were one day, like a fleet of ET craft, like in the movie Independence Day or whatever, I would absolutely wonder if this is a false flag scenario. I mean, I think we need to be aware, but I just don't think that that's going to happen. That's my own opinion at this time.
That's wonderful. Richard, before you go, we want you to give us the details of your website, etc. again, but just give us a little taste of what you're going to be talking about at the upcoming Exopolitics event on the 29th of September at Huddersfield University.
Yeah, this is actually, and I'm sure Anthony's waiting with bated breath because I haven't really gone over this with him, but what I really want to do is to describe, how the UFO cover-up has been complicit in stripping away many of the freedoms that you know, people have come to accept as their birthright in the UK and in the US and elsewhere, and how the UFO cover-up has really helped to strip away a lot of that, and going through the process of figuring out how to reclaim that. It's also, I mean, there's a lot, I'm sure I'll have a lot to say on the UFO reality and providing evidence, as I always try to do, to show that this is something real. But I want to go a little bit beyond that.
Yeah.
And really take it a step further and talk about reclaiming our freedom in an era of encroaching global fascism.
Yeah.
One in which the UFO reality is an integral part of what we are dealing with. So I think it's something a little bit more edgy than what I've done in the past. I've been exploring this sort of privately, and I'm putting together what I think is going to be a really exciting presentation and informative, I hope.
That's terrific. And just if you could tell us all about your website details again for our listeners, please, Richard. We'll put it all up on our website and on our Facebook anyway.
Love it. Yeah, richarddolanpress.com. And actually, I'm really so happy with that site because I had two wonderful people who really redid my website earlier this year for me. And it's really pretty and it's nicely organized, and I actually like it. So just go there, and it's got it's really it serves two functions. One, it's sort of like my site from my stuff and all of the things that I do, but it also carries all of my authors who are just brilliant, wonderful, intelligent authors, and there'll be more books coming out. So it really serves both of those functions, and I would encourage people. I have a lot of articles. I have dozens that I've written over the years there, and YouTube clips and everything else. It's a fun place to hang out.
Richard Dolan, you've always been a very upbeat, up-tempo, breath of fresh air, as I've described in this field. You've broken terrific ground. You really have been a gift to this area of research, and thank you so much for this inquiring mind of yours, because it's allowed you to continue to do your work. And I love very much how you always said that you're quite prepared to say that you've changed, things have moved on. Your honesty and all that you've brought to the table in terms of what you do is very, very acknowledged. And thank you so much for talking to us at Planet X Live. Richard Dolan, thank you so much.
You made my day with all of that. Thank you so much. I just want to stay as open-minded for the rest of my life and take it right to the end of the line. Wherever I end up is where I end up. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
This is Richard Dolan, and you're listening to Planet X Live.
Planet X. The truth is on air. This is Planet X. Planet X.
Wow, guys, wasn't that terrific? Just delighted that we could get to hear that from Richard Dolan. Really, really, again, upbeat, up-tempo, completely great buzz about him. I think I, for one, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing him again at the end of September at Huddersfield Uni. It's going to be great. I think Exopolitics, yet again, great lineup, and what a guy, what a great interview.
Absolutely, it's great. I mean, he's always interesting. He always comes out with something new. He's a great speaker. He always has something. Always a surprise from Richard Dolan.
Yeah.
He always comes up with. He always, like I said, he's a very, very intrepid explorer and a very, very intrepid kind of researcher. And it's great to think we're all going to meet up with him again. And you and I are going to meet up as well. And the three of us.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm hoping that we can get a little bit of filming done down there and get him to come on and say a few words. And you guys too.
That'd be cool, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So look,
yeah. And I hope we meet plenty of the listeners too, because I mean the 5th annual Exopolitics Expo is fantastic and is always worth going to.
Well, I think it's obvious there's going to be quite a lot of our listeners there, because of the competition entries. So we'll get some of them on video as well, and we can have a little chat about Planet X and see what they want for the future and see if we're doing things right.
Yeah,
brilliant. And it's great to get feedback from everybody. But guys, for now, thank you all so much, and to all our listeners, thanks for joining and listening to Planet X Live. We'll see you again next week, and in the meantime, just keep doing what you do and listening to All for a World in the Midst of Social and Technological Transformation, and may well redefine ufology in many important ways. Richard Dolan, welcome to Planet X Live. How are you, Richard? Quite an introduction.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure.
Terrific.
Thank you.
You are going to be coming over and speaking at the upcoming 5th annual Exopolitics event, which is going to be on the 29th of September at Huddersfield University. We're going to talk to you about that
Absolutely.
later
I'm very
on.
much looking forward to it.
Well, you'd be surprised the amount of people who I've spoken to that have actually made a specific point of saying, I'm going because I want to hear Richard Dolan speak again, and that's genuine. You've been very well received in the past, which is terrific.
So glad to hear that.
I know, and it's all down to Ants. We've got Ants on the line with us, as well as Ben. So it's going to be a good show. We're going to ask you lots of questions, and I'm really pleased that you're happy to go anywhere with this, and it makes a nice change that somebody's very, very open about their work, Richard. But before we start, not many people know a great deal about your work before you came to this field. Now, I know you live in Rochester in New York at the moment with your family, but before all of this happened, Richard, how did you get here? What brought you to these subjects? Tell us a bit about your background to begin with.
Yeah, well, it's a long journey. It's been about a 20-year ride, and I just want to mention, as far as answering questions, my attitude is if I've written about it, if I've talked about it, then I will never ever back away from it. So you can always ask me anything. I mean, truly anything about my research you ever want to ask. I've been doing this now. I've been interested in UFOs. Obsessed really is the right word, not interested, for about 2 decades. I think obsession's really the only word that captures it. But I didn't grow up with an obsession. I grew up as probably an intellectually obsessed kid. I guess I'll say that much. I've always been someone who digs deep, or at least I kind of a bulldog or pit bull. I just go after things, and I want answers. I've always been this way. When I was 10 years old, I was this way, according to my mother, who looked at me one time exasperated and said, "Richard, you have always been like this." And I think there was a little bit of admiration, but there was a bit of exasperation in her voice as well. But yes, I've just been a very motivated learner my whole life. Growing up, my interests have always been basically science and history and philosophy and literature and things like that. When I was a young guy, I went to college, university at a place called Alfred University, which is in western New York State. I grew up in the New York City area, but Alfred was a bit out there, and I just fell in love with history, fell in love with literature, philosophy. And in fact, it was while I was there that I won a scholarship to study at Oxford University.
Yeah.
I studied political theory, or political ideologies, actually is a technical phrase we had there.
This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try to explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Planet X Live, or perhaps it's good morning or good afternoon, depending where you're listening to us. On tonight's show, we've got Stretchy, the guy that makes it all happen. Hi, Stretchy.
Hi, AMs. We've
got Ben Emlyn-Jones. Hiya, Ben.
Hi, AM. How's it going?
Brilliant. And also, we've got Anthony Beckett, producer of Exopolitics GB. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Cheers.
Terrific. We've got coming up later on the competition winners, which are 2 tickets to attend the Exopolitics on the 29th of September, as well as a selection of DVDs of your choice of former Exopolitics conferences which have taken place. And then later on the show, we're going to be going over live to Rochester, New York, to speak to author and speaker and researcher Richard Dolan. What a show we've got lined up for you. You're listening to Planet X Live.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups, this is Planet X. Planet X. What's weird on the web this week?
Before we head over to Rochester, New York, and speak with our guest this evening, Richard Dolan, it's that time where we're going to speak to our Planet expert, Ben Emlyn-Jones, and find out what's been getting Ben's attention this week in the news. Hi, Ben. What's got your goat this week, mate?
Oh, hi. There's quite a lot, actually. I mean, of course, the situation in Syria is catching everyone's attention at the moment, and I could talk a lot about that, but it's a big subject, and we haven't got all the details yet. But there's several other subjects I want to bring up, actually, this week, and one of those is to do with Barack Obama, the US president, and it's actually something I've noticed before, and it does bother me considerably, and that is Barack Obama is the first black president of the United States, and all through his administration and during his election campaign, he has tried to associate his own identity with that of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, of course, was an activist in the 1960s for black people who were being treated very, very badly in many parts of the United States in those days, and he was a very decent man. He believed in non-violent non-cooperation with the system. He was inspired very much by Mahatma Gandhi. He was very much a spiritual man as well as a politician, and was one of the most respected people in history. Now, Barack Obama is the same colour as King, but apart from that, I can see absolutely nothing remotely similar about them. Martin Luther King was a man of peace. Barack Obama flies drones into Pakistan to blow people up, innocent bystanders. But Martin Luther King, of course, fought racism. He fought against racism against black people. Barack Obama is bedfellows with people who want to basically genetically modify all natural human races and reduce us to less than 500 million. And this is what I think is happening here, because we had a situation where the other day it was the 50th anniversary of a famous speech that Martin Luther King gave in Washington, D.C., and to mark the occasion, Barack Obama gave a speech from the very, very same location that King had done 50 years to the day. Now, I think this is a very, very nasty trick a psychological trick that's being played on the American people and people around the world, as well as an insult, actually, to the memory of Martin Luther King. This is not the first time that Obama has tried to leech off the legacy of Martin Luther King. He was actually inaugurated on Martin Luther King's birthday deliberately. We've got to get our heads around the fact that he may be America's first black president, but we must realise that this impression that because of that he's an anti-establishment figure is completely deluded. It's all empires and oppressive regimes have done this, okay, over the centuries, over the millennia. They have fooled their conquered subjects by withdrawing overt power and replacing it by a man of the people, a member of the conquered people who appears to be on their side, but it's completely and utterly the puppet of the empire. Now, the Roman Empire did this, the Spanish did this, the British Empire did this. It's the oldest trick in the book. I mean, Alex Jones made a film called The Obama Deception, which goes into this in more detail. But really, I really hope that Americans don't fall for this again. Mm-hmm. We don't fall for it again, because really, we shouldn't. So that's something that definitely got my goat this week.
Good. And there was something else you were going to tell us about that you mentioned earlier. I'm fascinated about this.
Yeah, this is kind of more a prediction than something I've sort of got my attention. It's something that's crept up on me kind of over the last few weeks, and that is there's a man I think everyone needs to keep an eye on, because I think he's going to play a very, very important role in the agenda to suppress information about paranormal, spiritual matters, UFOs, etc. His name is Professor Brian Cox, and I'm sure most listeners will have heard of him because over the last few years he has gone from being a scientist working at the particle accelerator at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. He was featured on a couple of TV programs a few years ago, but since then he's been taken by the BBC and by other media organisations, and he's been basically groomed to become a major media star. Which he has indeed. I mean, he's presenting all kinds of programs now about science. Even thing is, he's presenting wildlife programs like David Attenborough used to do. David Attenborough's now retired. Cox is a physicist, not a biologist, but yet he's still put in that position, and he presents several TV shows, several radio shows, and he's actually quite a hardline skeptic. I think he always has been. But he's becoming more so because I think he's been groomed for the role of Mr. TV Skeptic, the kind of job that's done by people like Professor Chris French and Susan Blackmore in the past. He's one of these people I think who's quite easy to sort of like subvert because he obviously enjoys the fame and fortune. He seems to be quite a conceited, egotistical kind of character. And he's very, very aggressive. I'll give you an example of a tweet that Brian Cox put out on Thursday the 29th. Right. A note to nutters. If you want a we value your opinion response, please don't use my personal email. I don't value your opinion, and I will call you names. Now, by nutters, Cox actually is referring to people like us, people who believe in the supernatural, paranormal, conspiracy theories, whether these are derogatory terms or not, and things like that, UFOs. He is a complete skeptic. And when I say call you names, he is a very, very hardline man. He uses the word knobber. He says, "You're a bunch of knobbers and twats," he says. He uses other words that I wouldn't repeat on the air.
But you've got the best impersonation of him I've heard so far, Ben.
Professor Brian Cox. You see, he's incredibly photogenic. Like he's this handsome, sort of like well-dressed man, quite boyish, good looks. I've got a friend actually.
He's a bit like me, Ben.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, don't. I tell you what. Don't ever betray us like he has, sir. But no, he's a really quite unpleasant individual. I mean, but I mean, he like I said, he calls us all kinds of names. Some of them are not broadcastable, and he doesn't care. He's quite open about it, and he's allowed to get away with it because he's so famous and so wonderful. And of course, people with ego problems are very, very easy to turn into controlled opposition, or even, I mean, I don't think he's actually hiding any secrets. I don't think he's actually no one's gone up to him and said, Brian, come here, sit down, have a cigar. Listen, there are such things as UFOs and ghosts, all right? But you're going to tell people that they aren't, okay? And we'll give you £50,000 a week. No, I don't think that's happened. I think, a person like that is a very, I mean, there are individuals in the field of science and media who I think are keeping secrets deliberately, knowingly. But I think they're in a minority because people like that are a bit of a liability because they can easily swap benches and develop a conscience, and so, just briefing everyone in and telling them to be quiet is a very top-heavy conspiracy. I suspect that Cox is much more of what you might call a useful idiot. And he actually believes what he says. I mean, he can spout complete nonsense and be 100% sincere. And people like that are far more useful. And all you have to do is feed his ego, and he'll do whatever you tell him to. He'll be a complete and utter glove puppet for whoever is really trying to keep it secret. So please, listeners, be on your alert for that man, because we're going to see a lot more of him over the years to come.
Give us Rupert Sheldrake any day.
Oh,
that's what I say, Ben.
I won't. Yeah, exactly. Good old Rupert Sheldrake, the man who's. I mean, I won't tell you what Cox said about him.
What did he say about him?
It's not broadcastable.
Right,
He's rude to everyone.
Oh.
He quite openly posts tweets saying how horrible people are who believe in in UFOs and the moon landings were faked, or ghosts, and he calls people knobbers. This is a word, I don't know if it's a slang from Manchester or wherever he comes from, or whether it's a word he made up, but I mean, I actually had a campaign called Knobs for Cox, which is a bit like the Cookies for Kelly campaign that the Exopolitics movement actually did.
I think
I said to everyone, send him a doorknob. Just not having any. Make sure it's just a nice doorknob. Just shouldn't have any sharp edges or anything that might hurt him. Just send him a doorknob and say, Ryan, you think we're all knobbers, do you? Well, here's your. During the Cookies for Kelly campaign, because there was a journalist in America, I think it was the New York Times, who said that people who believed in UFOs were cookies, in other words, nutcases. And so basically his office was inundated with cookies, real cookies, which you can eat, and he had thousands of them. I'm sure he was very popular with his colleagues for a while.
So you remember, everybody, you heard it here first on Planet X Live.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email, find us on Facebook. Planet X.
Richard Dolan is among the world's leading researchers and historians on the subject of UFOs. He's the author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State Volumes both 1 and 2, as well as an analysis of the future entitled AD, After Disclosure, when the government finally reveals the truth about alien contact. He's a regular guest on radio, and he's appeared on many televisions throughout the world, including the History Channel, Sci-Fi and the BBC. Since 2012, Richard has hosted his own The Richard Dolan Show, which airs on KGRA radio every Saturday evening from 8 till 11 Eastern Standard Time. In his books, articles and many interviews, Richard has analysed the destruction of our political liberties as a result of the UFO cover-up, the possible nature of the non-humans themselves, what their presence means for our civilization, why he believes the cover-up will end within our lifetime, and what is likely to happen after that. Richard is near completion of another groundbreaking work entitled UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, which is due out this year. It offers a fresh analysis of this phenomenon